Hey everyone, welcome to the meeting on parts of a research paper. Today we're talking about the abstract and discussion. So just a quick review, remember the main parts of a research paper that we're working on in this class are an abstract, introduction, methods, also known as materials, results, discussion, and a reference list. For milestone 4 this week, you're going to be actually doing a few more things than we've seen this week. You're going to be doing an abstract discussion. You're going to also do future research ideas. You're going to include discrepancies, and you're also going to be graded on articulation of response. So the abstract is going to be a snapshot of your entire paper. This is something that is the first thing that people read when they're looking at a paper. It's usually about a paragraph long. It can be longer, but you don't really want it to be much shorter. And you want to include at least 1 to 2 sentences from each major section of your paper. So you want to have a few sentences of introduction. You want to cover background, purpose, and objectives in there. You're going to have a few sentences of methods or how your research was performed, a few sentences of results, what you found, and a few sentences of discussion, which is going to be your conclusions and what it all means. So I've got a kind of lengthy abstract here. This is one that's on a bit on the longer side that we'll go through. So the very first part that you see here in black is the introduction background part of the abstract. So it says a quarter of all lagomorph species worldwide are threatened with extinction. Although captive breeding programs sometimes are implemented as emergency conservation measures, such efforts often experience limited success. A better understanding of the contributions of genetic diversity in husbandry to allow successful breeding of captive lagomorphs is now an urgent conservation priority. So what we did here is we kind of gave that broad background to endangered species or endangered lagomorphs, and we also introduced the concept of captive breeding, which is what this paper is about. In blue, this is our methods. So it reads, we used regression models to explore the genetic, biological, and husbandry factors associated with pairing success, growth, and survival during the 10-year captive breeding program for Columbia Basin pygmy rabbits, Brachylagus idahoensis, an ecologically significant unit at Washington State University. So this methods is very broad. Unlike your methods in your paper, it doesn't get detailed and specific. It's just a very broad overview saying we use regression models and what we were actually looking at, genetic, biological, and husbandry factors. And then in red, we have our results. And this is a little bit long for results, but still within reasonable limits. So it says pairing success increased whereas juvenile survival decreased over the years of the program. Pairing success and early juvenile growth declined with increasing Columbia Basin pedigree of the female, suggesting inbreeding depression among the small number of related founders. Pygmy rabbits face trade-offs between high reproduction and high juvenile mortality related to pen size, diet quality, and pairing strategy. Pygmy rabbits had greater pairing success and early juvenile growth, but lower juvenile survival in larger pens. Juvenile survival was also lower on the higher quality diet. Juveniles born at warmer ambient temperatures had a higher survival to emergence from their natal burrow. So again, what we've done here is instead of providing specific results where we're actually giving numbers and statistics, we're providing just a brief, broad overview of the main points that we found in our results section. And then finally in green, we have the conclusion. And it says, our study illustrates the complexity of using adaptive management to retain a unique genome for Columbia Basin pygmy rabbits while improving genetic diversity and simultaneously balancing intensive husbandry to improve survival with efforts to reduce artificial selection for the captive environment. So this is just a brief sentence stating what the general conclusion was for this paper. So that is, as you can see, that's a snapshot of your paper, or what we call an abstract. It's not specific, it's broad, and it covers all the major portions of your paper. You're also going to be working on your discussion this week. The discussion is an analysis or an interpretation of the results. So you want to start with a broad opening paragraph. You've just come off of the results, which are it's very dry, and you're just spouting out numbers, you're not saying what it means. So you need to bring the reader back into the paper. So start with a broad opening paragraph that kind of leads the reader into your discussion. You want to briefly summarize your results in the discussion and then analyze and interpret what those results mean. You're going to use sources to support your thoughts and the points that you're making, and then you want to finish with the concluding paragraph. You're going to draw it all together and relate it back to your hypothesis. So what do we mean by analyze and interpret the results? What we're saying with that is you're pulling meaning out of your results. You want to explain what you found, and you want to emphasize the importance of the results. Don't forget to make it all relate back to your hypothesis, and try to remember to use words that aren't definitive. You want to use words like this suggests, it possibly means, likely, maybe, or this could mean. And you want to avoid using definitive terms like this means or this proves, because remember your research is suggesting things, but you don't have you're not conclusively saying this is the only thing possible. So let's look at a little example here. In our results section, maybe you said females in small breeding pens produced a maximum of 3 litters a year, whereas 2 of 2 females held in larger naturalized breeding pens produced 4 litters a year. In the discussion, you might say something a little less specific, not necessarily include the numbers, say it a little more broad, and then interpret it. So females in larger pens produce more litters than those in smaller pens, suggesting that larger pens were more conducive to producing more kits. This may be due to a number of factors, including less disturbance from human workers, more abundant vegetation availability, and overall nutritional quality of their diet, or even more natural allowances for breeding behavior. So what I did was I took a piece of the results where we learned that larger pens produced more kits every year, and I restated that without the specific numbers, and then I gave some plausible causes and analysis of what that might mean. You're also going to be graded on future research in this milestone. So you need to take what you have learned from your studies and you need to suggest additional research that needs to be done. It should be beneficial and logical considering what has already been done in the studies that you looked at, and you should aim to include at least 2 suggestions for future research in your paper. This often fits really nicely into the concluding paragraph. You can repeat your sources found in their papers and suggest some ideas for future research based off of what they found, and then kind of relate it all back to your hypothesis at the end. So the concluding paragraph is a good place for that. So an example for future research may be after learning that chemical X impacted the growth of plant A, future studies should look at whether chemical X also impacts other species of plants and what the minimum dose is before impacts are seen. So you're basically taking a piece of information that you learned, which is chemical X affects the growth of plant A, and then you're suggesting something that's related and would give you further information on that. Discrepancies are differences in your data, and often people get this confused with research limitations. Research limitations are things that impact how your study turned out and the accuracy of your results. Discrepancies are differences between results. So it's basically like if 2 of your sources found conflicting results. An example might be study A found that chemical X impacted plant growth, but study B found that plants were not impacted by chemical X. So your studies found 2 different things. If there are discrepancies with your sources, that would tie nicely to the ideas for future research. And if there are no discrepancies, make sure that you say that so you still get credit for that part of the assignment. Articulation of your response, this is the same that you've seen in all your other milestones. Make sure that you include section headings and it says abstract and it says discussion on your paper, clearly labeled. This of course helps to just separate your sections and make things clear for the reader. Unlike the other sections where subheadings may be useful, the abstract you're not going to need subheadings because this is just a brief paragraph. And in the discussion, you're trying to bring everything together. So subheadings kind of interfere with that if you start discussing your paper separately. Remember, you're trying to tie it all together in the discussion. Your reference list, make sure that everything is looking good, and you can find examples in your APA manual and on Purdue Owl, excuse me. And just check out those examples and make sure that you're following it with your journal articles. As always, make sure you're putting your reference list in alphabetical order. Use initials for the first name. Don't forget all the necessary information, double space between references, and keep your font size and font type consistent amongst your references. These are the most common mistakes that I've been seeing. So to review, we talked about the things you'll be graded on for this week's milestone, which is the abstract, discussion, future research, discrepancies, and articulation of response. And your next assignment will actually be your final paper where you're going to pull all this together. And so I'll do another video for that coming up. Thanks, everybody.